Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back, not to the clash of swords or the thunder of long ships, but into the soft, rhythmic creak of wood and the whisper of wool threads sliding through fingers. You're stepping into a Viking longhouse just after sundown. The fire crackles in a low stone hearth, casting orange flickers on rough timber walls. Around you, the warm air smells like smoked fish, damp wool, and a bit too much goat. Looms lean against the walls like oversized skeletons, each one warped and weighted, quietly humming with purpose. Women sit on low stools, their hands moving with hypnotic precision. No one speaks, just the steady click thump and sigh of weaving. You're not here to witness a battle, a voyage, or a raid. Nope. You're here to watch fabric being made. Welcome to the thrilling world of loom operation. And you probably won't survive this. Boredom, that is. It's lethal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Always fun seeing that scroll by. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head, stepping into the longhouse. These beams weren't made for 6-foot modern frames. The floor is packed earth, and your feet sink slightly as you cross it. In one corner, bundles of raw wool sit waiting. Some yellowed, some gray, all puffed up like nervous cats. A small girl scoops handfuls and begins pulling them into longer, thin wisps, twisting and twisting until they become something stronger. You realize you're watching the beginning of a journey. One that ends on a sail, a tunic, or maybe a funeral shroud. This is the quiet power of weaving. It supports every other part of Viking life. No sail, no raid. No cloak, no winter survival. No swaddling cloths, no babies. But sure, let's keep pretending it's boring. One loom creaks to your right, and you turn to see a massive warp-weighted beast, taller than a grown man. Threads hang vertically from a horizontal bar, each one weighted by stones or clay whorls. A woman with sun-creased skin and very few teeth shifts a shuttle through the hanging strands, adjusting tension with a rhythm you can almost hear in your chest. It's not mechanical, it's bodily, instinctive. Her hips sway slightly, her elbows just so. If TikTok existed in the Viking Age, she'd have millions of followers for loom hacks and spinning Sunday reels. Historians still argue whether Viking men respected this labor as much as their swords, or whether it was just quietly tolerated, useful, but invisible. What we do know is that weaving wasn't a hobby. It was infrastructure. Every farmstead needed textiles, and every textile began right here, in these warm, smoky rooms. Above you, the rafters are strung with skeins of dyed wool like overgrown holiday tinsel. Some are a dull ochre, some greenish, blue, some nearly black. You later learn those black ones used crushed walnut husks and iron salts, a recipe that took weeks to get right and stained your hands for days. And then you learn something else. Those black threads, they're often used for mourning garments. They're heavy, scratchy, and whisper grief with every swish. The woman at the loom pauses to scratch her nose with the end of the shuttle. A cat jumps onto her lap, settling among the tangled yarn like it owns the place. It does. She smiles slightly, mutters something about Freyja's blessings, and continues weaving. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some Viking looms were set up slightly tilted. Not for ergonomics, but to keep mischievous spirits from tangling the warp at night. Superstition or clever engineering? You decide. You sit by the fire, the warmth licking your toes, and let the sounds of domestic industry wash over you. The spinning whir of dropped spindles, the scraping of combs through wool, the faintest sizzle from an iron pot of dye, hanging in the hearth's far edge. It's meditative, like listening to someone fold laundry with serious intent. You glance at the nearest loom again, and try to count the warped threads. You get to 12 before your eyes blur. Then you look closer at the weights. Simple stones, sure, but some are carved with symbols. Runes. One has a little spiral pattern, another what looks like a bird. You realize they're not just tools, they're charms, anchors of fate, because weaving wasn't just utility, it was mystical. The Norns, those legendary Norse fate weavers, weren't randomly assigned their gig. Weaving was already seen as a metaphor for life, thread stretched, knotted, cut. Each decision warp, each consequence weft. Once woven, never undone. You let your head lean back against a timber post. It smells like tar and old moss. A woman nearby hums a song, soft and low, and you pick out the rhythm. It matches her loom's sway. Maybe she's counting. Maybe it's just comfort. Either way, it lulls you. The fire pops. The cat snores. Someone drops a spindle and curses. But quietly, like even the bad words are sleepy tonight. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining what it would be like to live this life. Not a warrior. Not a trader. Just someone who wakes up early to card wool, spin yarn, and maybe get one good joke in before lunch. Not exciting, but steady. Woven into the fabric of everything. And just as your mind starts to drift, the loom creaks again. Back to work. You wake, not from sleep, but from a kind of trance. That soft creak and sigh of the loom hasn't stopped, like an ancient lullaby looping endlessly. But now, you're in a different part of the longhouse. The light is cooler, dimmer. A woven curtain sways gently, separating work from rest. Behind it, a quieter flurry of motion unfolds. Here, survival takes shape and thread. A middle-aged woman squats over a heap of wool, combing it through a set of metal teeth, wool cards made from bone and iron. She's not in a rush. This is meditative. She pauses to shake her arms, flex her fingers, then gets back to teasing out the tangles. You crouch beside her, watching the puff of cloud become ordered ribbons. You're struck by how physical it is. Her arms, though stringy, are strong, like they could lift a cow, or at least win in an arm wrestling match against most podcasters. This process doesn't end here. A girl nearby is using a drop spindle, twisting those carded wisps into yarn. The motion is hypnotic drop, spin, twist, wind. Over and over. It's low-tech brilliance. She barely looks at what she's doing. Her hands know the dance. You reach out and touch a finished skein. It's softer than you expected. Not scratchy. But the next one over. Brutal. Like petting a hedgehog dipped in vinegar. That's because Viking wool wasn't uniform. Some sheep were bred for warmth, some for durability. The fancy stuff, you had to pluck that from inside the fleece. Called thell. A downy underlayer that feels like sadness in a cloud, but most folks got the outer. Tog. Thick, wary, and weather-resistant. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Viking textiles weren't just warm, they were strategic. Cloaks were often double, layered, with tog on the outside to repel rain and then on the inside to trap heat. Yes, it was basically the original Gore-Tex. You lean back against a post and glance around. This room isn't for show, it's production. And every strand counts. Babies swaddled in winter wool survived longer. Elders wrapped in thick cloaks kept walking through frost season. And warriors, yeah, them too, needed tunics, leg wraps, mittens. If your feet froze off on a raid, it didn't matter how sharp your axe was. This textile work, it's the skeleton key behind the Viking Age. The woman flicks a bit of lichen from her sleeve and smiles. She gestures for you to smell the pot she's stirring. You lean over it and get a lungful of something sour tangy, like if yogurt fell in love with compost. It's fermented sheep urine, and yes, it's for cleaning and softening wool. So if you've ever complained about laundry day, just remember, it could be worse. Fringe fact of the night, Vikings used stale urine, called lant, to full their wool. It acted like a detergent and helped lock the fibers together. People would actually collect it in special pots. Imagine going door to door. Hi, could I borrow a cup of pee? I'm washing the curtains. Your guide laughs when she sees your face. She gets it. Even 1,000 years ago, this smelled awful. You move to a different corner, where strips of cloth are being stitched together. A woman with inked knuckles threads a bone needle with practiced ease. She's repairing a tear in a sailcloth, muttering under her breath. Not a prayer. A calculation thread counts. Stitch lengths. This is precision work. You realize she's a sailmaker, which in Viking terms means she's one of the few people keeping entire fleets afloat. Her cloth, stitched right, could hold wind like a promise. Stitched wrong, disaster. Historians still argue whether sail making was done only by women or also by professional guilds. What's clear is that without sails, those legendary longships would be fancy floating bathtubs. And yes, it took tens of thousands of hand-spun threads to weave just one. You look down at your fingers. Try to imagine spinning that much yarn, then weaving it into a wide, square panel with perfect tension, then sewing multiple panels together so they catch the wind just right without ripping. Suddenly, your respect for medieval textiles skyrockets past your favorite blanket at home. You wander outside for a moment, letting the crisp air clear your nose of that urine tang. A breeze rushes past, and your eyes follow the motion. On a clothesline, woolen cloaks flap like battle flags. Not all are gray and brown. Some have stripes, red or blue, faded but proud. These aren't decoration. They're stories, family signs, trade symbols, and warmth. Always warmth. A boy no older than 10 walks past, dragging a spindle lazily behind him. Not playing. Working. His wool will become thread. His thread might become part of his own winter shirt. Or maybe it's going into sailcloth. That'll cross oceans. That's the thing about Viking weaving. It's never just about the object. It's about continuity. You don't weave for today. You weave for survival, for legacy. The breeze kicks up again, and you feel the tug of your own cotton t-shirt. It suddenly seems flimsy, uncommitted. That girl by the fire earlier. Her tunic took months. Yours came from a warehouse, and probably isn't even holding up that well. You chuckle. Not because it's funny, though maybe it is, but because you're starting to realize this world of spinning, weaving, stitching isn't boring at all. It's foundational. It's the heartbeat you didn't hear until the room got quiet. Someone calls for more wool, and a small stampede of feet rustles behind you. A basket is emptied. A new batch begins. Like always, like forever. You're ushered toward the far end of the longhouse, where the light grows thinner and the looms grow taller. Here, the real stars of the show stand in hushed reverence. Viking warp-weighted looms. They tower above you like gatekeepers to another dimension. You squint upward. These looms are massive, crude, and somehow elegant. Imagine if scaffolding and harp had a baby, and then made it wear stone shoes. That's a warp-weighted loom. The threads hang down like rain, and each one ends in a little stone or clay weight, pulling it taut. Those weights clack gently if you breathe too close. The vertical threads are called the warp. These are your foundation. The horizontal threads, or weft, are woven. And yes, you'll be dreaming about those terms tonight. Maybe even whispering them in your sleep. Warp, weft, warp. You inch closer to one and try to peer behind it. There's a simple wooden bar resting horizontally across the top, and suspended from it, hundreds of threads descend in neat little rows, each passing through a vertical set of loops called heddles. The weaver shifts these heddles to lift different sets of threads, creating an open gap.
A shed!
Where the shuttle can pass. It's a dance. Every thread has a partner, a step, a place to be. You try to follow the rhythm. The weaver pulls the heddles. The warp separates. A wooden shuttle zips through like a bird with a job. Then she beats the new thread into place with a wide comb called a beater. Not a subtle name, but hey, it gets the job done. This system is ancient. Older than the Vikings, older than Rome. Warp-weighted looms date back to the Neolithic era, and yet here they are, still holding strong in the 9th century like a grandparent who refuses to upgrade their flip phone. You respect that. Mainstream, historical fact, alert archaeologists have found loom weights in nearly every Viking Age excavation site where domestic activity was present. even in regions where looms themselves didn't survive. Those stones did. They're like textile fossils, each one quietly whispering, "We were here, and we were very busy." Now, for the fun twist, your fringe fact of the night: some loom weights were made from repurposed grave goods or smashed household items. Imagine weaving your winter blanket using a weight that was once your uncle's favorite cup. Cozy and cursed, perhaps. The woman at the loom today is tall, square-shouldered, and completely focused. Her sleeves are rolled up. Her braids are tied back with a strip of undyed wool. She doesn't speak, just breathes in time with the loom. You count. Inhale, pull heddles. Exhale, throw shuttle. Inhale, beat. It's practically yoga. Viking flow. Tuesdays and Thursdays. You step around her, careful not to touch the loom. It's considered bad luck unless you've been blessed with weaving rights in the household. That's not superstition. That's serious hierarchy. In some regions, the right to operate a loom belonged only to the lead woman of the farmstead. Others had communal setups where you'd reserve loom time, like an appointment at the world's least exciting spa. Historians still argue whether weighted looms were shared communally or privately guarded within households. The truth: likely both, depending on region, wealth, and local custom. Either way, nobody messes with another woman's warp. You notice something odd as you peer closer. The vertical threads aren't all the same color. Every 10th one is slightly darker. Intentional. It helps the weaver count and pattern the fabric more easily. But it's not just functional, it's subtly beautiful. Like a spreadsheet dressed up for a party. She pauses to sip water from a horn mug and gives you a look, not annoyed, just amused. She knows you've been staring at her loom like it's a spaceship. To her, it's Tuesday. To you, it's a masterclass. You lean in again, and this time, you hear the loom's quiet song. A mixture of clacks, thumps, creaks, and breath. It's not music, it's structure, discipline, peace in repetition. Just when you think you've seen it all, a younger weaver walks in with a basket of wool. Her loom's just to the side. Smaller, meant for narrower cloth, maybe a sash or band. But her shuttle is curved and delicate. You watch her fingers flick it through the shed like a magician tossing cards. Here's the catch: she's weaving a pattern. A real one. Little squares, triangles, a hint of something floral. How? By changing which heddles she lifts and when. She doesn't need dye or embroidery. She's building the design right into the fabric, thread by thread. You realize pattern weaving isn't decorative fluff. It's memory, tradition, hidden messages for those who know how to read it. And now the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether complex patterns like these were common in everyday cloth or reserved for elites and ceremonial wear. The archaeological evidence is threadbare. Literally, but the surviving samples suggest that Vikings weren't just practical. They were artistic. You sit for a moment on a low stool and try to count how many motions go into one row of cloth. Pull heddles, lift warp, insert weft. Beat, repeat. It's easily a dozen micro decisions per inch. That scarf you bought on Etsy, poser? This is the real deal. You touch the edge of a finished cloth hanging nearby. It's rougher than linen, heavier than cotton, warmer than regret. It feels like protection. Not just from the cold, but from the void. A small shield made of time, care, and hand strength. The weaver gives you a nod, not an invitation. A dismissal. She's done explaining with gestures. The loom's in motion again. The moment has passed. You step away, humbled. You're drawn now to a low bench near the fire pit, where the warmth is more than physical. Laughter ripples through the air, soft and sudden, like someone's just told a joke that's been aging for a century. It's not the slapstick kind. More like the wary, knowing chuckle of people who've been threading wool and threading lives longer than you've been breathing. This is where weaving becomes conversation. Around the fire, a group of women pass spindles between them, fingers moving even as they speak. One mends a broken warp thread with the patience of a saint. Another sharpens a bone needle with slow, circular scrapes. You watch as their hands work autonomously, leaving their mouths free for stories, arguments, and occasionally, a bawdy pun about sheep. Don't look so surprised. Viking women weren't shy. One woman, older and sharp-eyed, launches into a tale about a time her loom weights cracked mid-winter, and the entire household had to wear patchwork cloaks, sewn from sailcloth. Everyone groans dramatically, then cackles. Someone else offers a quiet prayer to Frigg, goddess of home and hearth. You realize quickly, this isn't idle chat. It's culture transmission, oral history dressed as gossip. You're now knee-deep in what scholars call woman's sphere. And no, it's not some lesser category. In Viking society, this was the pulse. The domestic sphere didn't mean docile. It meant sovereign. Within these walls, women ruled. You glance again at the tools. The loom is more than a machine. It's a power center. Controlling cloth meant controlling warmth, trade, and survival. That's influence. And you're starting to see why Norse mythology made the goddesses the weavers of fate. Mainstream historical fact, Viking law codes mention textiles repeatedly, not just as goods, but as forms of payment and inheritance. A particularly woven cloak could be worth a cow. A sail, 10 times that. Textile production wasn't some side hustle. It was a cornerstone of the economy. But don't let all that respectability fool you. These women are fierce. One smacks her spindle down like a gavel when someone interrupts her. Another rolls her eyes so hard you hear it. You see the bonds here. The quiet rivalries. The decades-long jokes. The tears shared when someone's baby didn't make it through winter. Woven into every cloth are these emotions, these tiny flickers of humanity. A dog flops down near your feet and starts snoring loudly, as if to say, yeah, this is the good part. Fringe tidbit time. In some regions, women were buried with miniature looms or loom weights tucked into their graves. Not full-sized tools, just symbolic ones enough to say, she made, she mended, she mattered. Tiny tome tags for domestic deities. The woman across from you is threading a handlebar with serious precision. She curses softly as she gets a thread wrong and has to unpick several rows. Another woman teasingly says, "The gods weave straighter than you." And everyone laughs again. You notice how their jokes often revolve around weaving metaphors. Tangling the threads means messing up. Cutting someone's warp isn't just poetic, it's an insult. And if you're tight as a weft, well, let's just say that might involve more mead than manners. Historians still argue whether weaving spaces like this were formally communal or just evolved that way. But what's clear is that they were central to Viking social life. The hearth wasn't just a heat source, it was a nucleus. And the loom wasn't just a tool, it was a stage. You glance around at the walls, strips of woven bands, called tablet, woven trim, hang like garlands. Some are intricate beyond belief: diamonds, chevrons, serpents. These were used to edge tunics or belts, and they could take weeks to complete. They're the Viking version of accessorizing, but they're also something more: clan markers, regional identifiers, even secret codes. You catch a young woman fidgeting with her band as she talks to someone her age. Is it a gift? A flirtation? You realize she's nervously weaving affection into warp and weft. Just like today's friendship bracelets, but with higher stakes and fewer emojis. Outside, the wind kicks up, rattling the wooden shutters. A baby whimpers in a side room, and instantly a woman stands to fetch a swaddling wrap. She returns with a blanket she's clearly made herself. Tight weave, soft finish, trimmed with dyed bands. She wraps the child, hums something low and rhythmic, and rocks him until the room forgets he ever cried. You feel it again, that realization that this isn't boring. It's profound. You're not watching art. You're watching infrastructure, emotion, survival, memory, all stitched together in plain brown wool. Someone drops a needle, and everyone freezes for a heartbeat. Lost needles are small disasters here. One woman gets on her knees, muttering something about Odin's one eye, probably a joke, and finds it wedged in a floorboard crack. She raises it like a trophy. Cheers. You sit back against a beam and let the sensory overload fade into something more peaceful. The flicker of firelight, the soft clack of loom weights, the low drone of voices. This isn't history you learn. It's history you feel. And just when your eyes start to close, a new voice starts telling a saga, something about a woman who wove a ship's sail so perfectly. It never tore once in 20 years. Whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. The point is, they're still telling it. You rise early the next morning. At least, it feels like morning. The longhouse is hushed, with only a few embers glowing in the hearth and dew clinging to the outer threshold. The first light creeps in through a crack above the door, casting a faint line across the dirt floor. And just beyond that, a doorway opens into something you didn't expect. The farmhouse's factory. Stepping outside, you blink into the chill. Sheep bleat softly in the pasture, already awake, and doing their part for the textile empire, growing fleece. A few women are already at work, knee-deep in buckets of wet wool, arms red from scrubbing. The dye pots haven't started bubbling yet. That comes later, but for now, it's prep day. And prep day is no joke. You approach a low bench where one woman is pounding something with a mallet. It looks like a lump of liver, but smells like forest floor and vinegar. It's lichen, harvested, soaked, and mashed until it gives up its color. Another woman is grinding dried madder root into powder. Her hands are stained a faint red. It'll take a full afternoon to coax that pigment into something strong enough to cling to cloth. Meanwhile, a younger girl fetches buckets of stale urine from a corner shed. You wisely keep your distance. This isn't just domestic labor, it's chemistry. Primitive? Sure. Smelly? Absolutely. But make no mistake, this yard is a textile lab. Ratios matter. Timing matters. And if you get a batch wrong, congratulations, you just ruined 3 weeks of spinning. Mainstream historical fact: Viking women oversaw every stage of textile production. From shearing the sheep to weaving the final cloth, they managed labor, resources, and schedules. In many ways, they were the project managers of early medieval society. One woman nearby is scarring a batch of wool with ashes and hot water. She churns it with a wooden stick, pausing occasionally to scoop off foam. Not the good kind. This foam smells like wet fireplace and despair. You try not to gag. And now, your fringe fact of the morning: some dye ingredients were considered so potent, or sacred, that they had to be stored separately, even buried between use. One particularly prized moss, orchil, was so temperamental it could combust if stored improperly. Imagine your shed catching fire because your favorite shade of purple got too moody. You wander around the perimeter of the yard. In one corner, someone's stretching a piece of cloth across a frame, beating it rhythmically with a wide paddle. The noise is loud, jarring, like someone spanking a table repeatedly. This is fulling, a process that tightens and shrinks the fabric, making it denser and warmer. It also makes your biceps look great. You nod approvingly. Next to that, a wide plank is set up on sawhorses. A woman sits beside it, rhythmically scraping the surface of a damp cloak with a curved blade. She's raising the nap, teasing out the fibers to make the cloth fuzzier and more insulating. This isn't craft. It's optimization. Every stroke makes the fabric softer, warmer, more useful. And you start to notice something curious. None of this is being done inside. The farmhouse might house the loom, but everything else spills out into the yard. Historians still argue whether these outdoor prep areas were permanent or seasonal. Some suggest they were erected only in spring and autumn, when wool processing peaked. Others believe the tools and stations remained all year, simply shifting tasks with the seasons. You move toward a wide trough filled with brownish water. 2 boys are rinsing wool, sloshing it around with surprising glee for a chore that smells like sheep burps and mildew. But they laugh, splash each other, and eventually return to the task. This isn't punishment, It's participation. The entire household helps. And with good reason. One sale could require over 200 pounds of spun wool. Let that sink in. 200 pounds. And that's before weaving even begins. You sit on a fence rail and try to imagine life here. Not for a weekend. Not for a history walkthrough. But every day, rain or shine, cold or colder, your schedule dictated by sheep, weather, and warp tension. Your milestones measured in skeins and bolts. It's not romantic. But there's something deeply satisfying in its rhythm. Someone nearby dumps a full dye pot into a trench, sending up a puff of steam and the smell of cabbage and socks. She mutters a curse and starts over. No one scolds her. This happens. You get it wrong. You try again. A young woman calls you over to help stretch a finished piece of cloth. You grip the edge and pull, feeling the resistance in your arms. It's rough stuff, scratchy, still damp. She pulls the opposite side and grins when you flinch. Soft after winter, she says, then walks away. You shake your hands out and notice the dye has already seeped into your palms, a pale red hue that won't wash off soon. It's like the cloth claimed you. You're part of the process now. The farmhouse in front of you doesn't look like a factory, but that's exactly what it is. A vertical operation. Raw wool in. Finished textiles out. Every wall, every fence post, every sunlit yard corner becomes workspace. There are no days off. No, quitting time. Only the next task and the one after that. But strangely, that doesn't feel oppressive. It feels grounded. You see purpose in every motion. Skill in every hand. And yes, exhaustion behind many eyes, but also pride. You glance back at the loom inside the doorway. Silent for now. Resting. But you know it'll start creaking again soon. And the warp will stretch. And the weft will race. And another piece of history will be spun into being. You brush your palms on your tunic, ignoring the red smear it leaves behind. It's fine. You'll wear it like a badge. You're seated now at the edge of a hill, overlooking a misty field that stretches toward a distant fjord. Everything feels still, like the world is holding its breath, but there's something different in the air tonight. Something mythic. From behind you comes a rhythmic sound. Not a loom this time, but something eerier. A soft metallic rasp. A whisper of cloth sliding. You turn and the figures are already there, weaving in shadows. Valkyries. Or at least, the version your mind paints from ancient stories whispered by firelight. These aren't your usual feather, helmet, fantasy, warriors. These are the choosers of the slain. And tonight, they're not riding horses. They're standing before a vast, spectral loom, using intestines for thread, swords for shuttles, and arrows for warp weights. They weave battle, literally. Each tug and throw binds a warrior's fate into the cloth. You blink hard. It's dreamlike, of course, metaphorical, but it doesn't feel any less real. The tale is ancient, recorded in the Darai Arja-e, a poem preserved in the Angelus saga. It describes 12 Valkyries weaving men's fates before the Battle of Clontarf. They chant, they weave, and with every line of cloth, they decide who lives and who falls. It's not gentle. It's terrible, awe-inspiring, and utterly tactile. Mainstream historical fact. The Darar Alkai poem is one of the earliest surviving examples that links weaving and battle. It places women, not on the sidelines, but as the quiet orchestrators of war itself. Through thread, one Valkyrie slices her thread, and a vision of a fallen warrior flashes across your mind's eye. Another adjusts tension, and you feel a shift, like the world realigns slightly under your feet. This isn't just mythology, it's worldview. Life is a loom. Fate is fabric. You glance down at your own fingers and wonder, if someone wove your fate, how would the pattern look? A jagged stripe? A crooked diamond? Hopefully not an unfinished row. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the phrase, cutting someone off, has roots in these weaving metaphors. To cut the thread was to end a life, a literal snip, and your story stopped weaving. And here's the scholarly wrinkle. Historians still argue whether the Valkyrie, weaver motif was uniquely Norse or borrowed from earlier Indo-European traditions. Greek mythology had the Fates, Clotho Lachesis, Atropos, who spun, measured, and cut life's thread. But the Norse twist adds battle, blood, and that quiet female sovereignty. You watch as one Valkyrie reaches into a basket beside her loom. Not for thread. For bone. She lays it across the beam and uses it to mark a border. You realize it's a jawbone, maybe a token, maybe a message. She looks at you and doesn't smile. It's not hostile. Just resolute. You're reminded that Viking women weren't just farmers and weavers. They were keepers of knowledge. Of magic, too. The practice of seer, a kind of ritual magic involving fate and foreseeing, was often performed by women. And often, it included the spinning of threads, the knotting of cords, the weaving of visions. So when you hear someone say, spinning a tale, remember. It once meant conjuring truth from chaos. The Valkyrie's chant grows louder now, though still low and toneless. It matches the beat of your heart. It's hard to tell whether you're awake or dreaming, and honestly, you don't mind. Something about this is more real than reality. Then, just as quickly as they arrived, they vanish. You're left staring at a single thread trailing from your hand. It's red, not blood. Red. More like cochineal. Vivid. Defiant. You tie it around your finger instinctively. A thread of memory. Or protection. Who knows? Back in the waking world, the fire is crackling again. You're in the longhouse. The looms are quiet but not empty. Someone has left a half-finished band still stretched across a small table loom. You touch it gently. The pattern is zigzagged, slightly off. You wonder if they meant it that way. Or if they got interrupted. The wind whistles through a gap in the timber wall, and for a second you hear it again, the loom of fate. Creaking, sighing, whispering across time. This wasn't just women's work. It was sacred work. Symbolic. Strategic. And yes, slightly spooky. And if you ever doubted the power of yarn to bend reality, just remember, to the Vikings, even death could be stitched. You're back inside the longhouse, where the heat has returned and the scent of wool fills the air like steam in a sauna made of sweaters. The looms are humming again. Someone is combing fleece nearby. Another is boiling something in a wide pot that smells halfway between herbal tea and unwashed socks. But today, your focus shifts to something deceptively ordinary: wool. The real treasure of the Viking age wasn't gold or jewels. It was wool. You reach down and touch a folded cloak. It's coarse but comforting, like hugging a tree with good intentions. This unassuming fabric, thick, heavy, a little scratchy, was the backbone of Norse civilization. It kept people warm. It clothed warriors and toddlers alike. It even powered Viking ships across oceans. Yes, wool. The fiber that conquers. Mainstream historical fact. Wool was the single most important textile material for the Vikings. It was abundant, adaptable, and weatherproof. The Norse climate wasn't kind to linen, and cotton was an exotic import. But sheep were everywhere. And they were practically wool factories with hooves. You peer out the longhouse's narrow window and spot a herd grazing on a rocky hillside. Their wool varies in color: gray, brown, white, and each shade becomes part of the Norse palette. There was no bleached, Instagram, filtered white here. Just honest, earthy tones, spun from nature's mood board. You return to the loom and follow the threads with your eyes. One cloak could take a month to weave, longer if patterned, but its value extended far beyond comfort. A good cloak was currency. It could be bartered, gifted, even counted as dowry. One sagas mentions a man giving 20 cloaks to settle a blood feud, which sounds expensive, unless you were the one bleeding. You run your fingers across a finished bolt of fabric, sailcloth. Tighter weave, tougher finish. This isn't meant for warmth. This is meant for wind, for crossing fjords, for survival at sea. And here comes the fringe fact: Viking sails were often made entirely of wool. Flax was rare and fragile, so wool got the job, spun woven, and then treated with lanolin and sometimes fish oil to repel water. Not exactly mint, scented, but seaworthy. A single square sail could require up to 800 sheep's worth of wool. Imagine organizing that shearing day. Bring your comms and your patience. You hear someone call out behind you. A woman is folding cloth into neat stacks, each marked with a small wooden token. She's inventorying. Tracking. Because this isn't just weaving, it's economics. Textile goods were taxed, traded, and recorded. And the best weavers weren't just artists. They were businesswomen. You step over to the hearth where someone's dyeing thread. The pot simmers, releasing a cloud of reddish mist. This one's madder root, you're told. It clings beautifully to wool, sinking into every fiber. And unlike flax, wool doesn't just take dye. It devours it. Rich reds, deep blues, vibrant golds. You realize color wasn't just decoration. It was status, story, and signal. Historians still argue whether color indicated social class in Viking society or was more a matter of access and geography. Some finds suggest bright garments for elites, duller hues for farmers. But others argue that even remote households made bold dye efforts. Maybe to feel connected, maybe to show off at feasts. You look back at the loom again. The weaver's foot nudges one of the warp weights back into place. It swings slightly, like a pendulum. Time doesn't pass here in hours. It passes in rows. A girl nearby asks if you've ever worn a true Viking cloak. You shake your head. She wraps one around your shoulders. It's heavy. It smells like sheep and smoke. But it's warm. And suddenly, you get it. This isn't just a blanket. It's armor. Against wind. Against cold. Against the feeling that you don't belong in a world this hard. The girl laughs when you try to walk in it. It's too long. You trip. She yanks it off you and folds it again, perfectly, as if she's done this 100 times. And she probably has. You sit beside a pile of wool and think about value. We measure worth today in money, maybe in followers, maybe in fast shipping. But here, value is labor, time, skill. Sheep, you imagine a ship sailing into the sunrise, its square sail taut with wind. Every thread in that sail was made by someone's hand, someone who didn't raid, who didn't fight, who didn't appear in the Sagas. But without them, that ship doesn't move. That's the quiet power of wool, of weaving, of the people behind it. And the next time someone says the Vikings only cared about gold, ask them how far a longship gets without a sail. You find yourself at the far end of the homestead now, beneath a wide awning where shadows stretch long and low. The air is thick with steam, pungent and earthy. Pots bubble over open flames, each one tended like a living thing. This is no kitchen. This is a dye house. And you're about to learn that color. True, lasting, glorious color comes at a cost. A woman stands over a cauldron, stirring slowly with a branch thicker than your arm. The liquid inside is a deep brownish purple, and the smell. Well, imagine soup made of hot bark, rusty coins, and something faintly insect-like. You try not to breathe through your nose. She gestures for you to come closer. You hesitate. She raises an eyebrow. You obey? She dips a length of yarn into the vat and lifts it out slowly. At first, it looks dull and gray. But as the air hits it, the color blooms. Deep, rich blue. Indigo, pulled from fermented wood. It's like watching magic performed with compost. Mainstream historical fact, Viking dyes weren't just decorative. They were labor, intensive, finicky, and often expensive. Natural dyeing required not only the raw materials, plants, insects, lichen, but the time to extract, ferment, and bind the pigment to the fiber. The result? A colored cloth that could last years, even decades, without fading. The woman tosses a pinch of something into the pot. It hisses. She looks smug. You don't ask questions. Nearby, a second vat simmers a rich, rusty red, madder root, dug up, dried, ground down, and coaxed into revealing its chromatic secrets. The yarns that emerge from this one are the color of dried blood and late sunsets. The dye mistress, because yes, that's clearly her job, plucks them out with wooden tongs and lays them across a drying rack where they steam like cooked noodles. Then there's the yellow. Oh, the yellow. That bright, assertive hue comes from weld, a scrappy roadside plant with roots deep in European history. But it can also come from birch leaves, onion skins, or even urine-soaked straw. You glance at the pot labeled with a small carved sheep and choose not to investigate. Here's your quirky tidbit. The color green wasn't easy to make. Vikings often layered blue and yellow dyes to achieve it. First dipping the wool in weld, letting it dry, then plunging it into woad. It worked, but it was a gamble. Too hot and the whole batch turned murky brown. Too cold and it never took. So yes, making one green tunic could take a full week. Sometimes longer. And you thought choosing a phone case was hard. You step back to avoid the steam, nearly tripping over a pile of lichen. It's crunchy, dry, and looks like something your grandma would keep in a drawer and call decorative. But this is orchil lichen, one of the few sources of purple pigment. It takes months to ferment properly. It's rare, expensive, almost mythical. Some historians think only the wealthiest Viking households had access to true purple dyes. Others argue that clever foragers and travelers brought back orchil as gifts or trade. What's not debated is its power. Purple wasn't just pretty. It signified status, connection, maybe even divine favor. You lean over a tray where dyed wool is drying in careful rows. Each skein has a tag, bone, etched with runes, maybe the weaver's name, maybe the recipe, or maybe a prayer. Some believe Viking women used chants while dyeing to honor the goddesses or ensure the color held fast. Were they spells? Songs? Scholar bait? Who knows? Historians still argue whether these chants were ritualistic or just mnemonic rhymes to help remember recipes. One thing's certain, dyeing was a sacred mess. The dye mistress hands you a strand of cloth, still wet. It's blue, startlingly so. And it drips down your wrist as you hold it. She points to your sleeve, and you realize it's now stained. She laughs. You're part of the process again. Someone nearby begins beating a length of dyed fabric to soften it. The sound is rhythmic and brutal. The cloth darkens slightly as the fibers tighten, locking in color. You're told this is essential. Not just for feel, but for durability. A Viking tunic had to hold up to sea spray, frost, and probably at least one goat accident. You move toward a wooden wall where strips of dyed yarn hang like a rainbow in exile. Some are brilliant, others muted. All are earned, no shortcuts, no quick fixes, just time, patience, and very smelly water. You imagine life before color, everything beige, brown, wool, gray. Then imagine being the first person to pull a crimson thread from a dye pot and realize you could wear fire. That thread wouldn't just warm you, it would mark you. It would say something. A young girl trots by with a basket of finished skeins, her face streaked with indigo. She looks like a smurf in training. You wave. She waves back, proud of her stains. You sit beside the dye racks and feel the heat radiating from the pots. It's comforting, even with the smell, and you realize this might be the heart of the entire operation, not the loom, not the fleece, but this smoky, smelly, magical corner where color is born, because color isn't vanity, it's voice, it's memory, and once it's woven into wool, it lasts longer than most stories. You're standing now at the edge of a dock, the cold wind tugging gently at your sleeves. Ahead of you, a longship bobs patiently, its hull dark with tar and its sail pulled taut above it. Silent, square, magnificent. But this isn't a shipbuilder's tale. No hammer, no axe, no oak planks today. You're here for the part no one talks about, the part that moves the ship, the sail. It's enormous, roughly the size of a classroom chalkboard, and woven entirely by hand. You reach out and touch its edge, coarse, stiff, nearly waxy. This isn't your grandma's quilting fabric. This is battle-grade wool, felted and greased and ready to harness the wind like it owes you money. Mainstream historical fact, Viking sails were made from tightly woven wool, then treated with lanolin and sometimes soaked in fish oil to repel water and increase durability. A good sail could last years. A bad one, disaster mid-voyage. You pace slowly beneath it, watching the pattern of threads. The weave is tight, so tight, in fact, that it barely lets light through. You try to imagine weaving this much cloth. Then imagine doing it with a warp, weighted loom, indoors, in winter, with a crying toddler and a pot of half, done dye simmering nearby. One sail to months of work, hundreds of pounds of wool, and the combined efforts of multiple households. It's no exaggeration to say a village raised a sail. Not just in labor, but in spirit. Fringe tidbit, some Viking sails were patterned with stripes or checks, dyed before assembly. This wasn't just to look cool, though, to be fair, they did. It may have helped with visibility, recognition, and even intimidation. A red and black sail gliding toward you on the foggy horizon. Yeah, that's not a social call. You move around to the side of the ship where the sail has been partially lowered for repairs. A woman is stitching along its edge, her bone needle flashing like a fish fin in the dim morning light. She doesn't speak. Her focus is absolute. Her stitches are small, even, spaced with the kind of precision that only comes from hundreds of hours spent on cloth. You sit beside her, and she hands you a scrap. "Try," she says. You fumble, obviously. Your thread knots, your stitch snags. She takes it back without comment and smooths it flat. Then, with one fluid motion, she corrects your mistake. The sail is too important to let kindness get in the way of competence. Historians still argue whether sail making was a specialized profession or part of the regular weaving duties of women in Norse society. Some evidence suggests traveling weavers or dedicated sail makers existed, while other finds imply this knowledge was passed down within households, like a prized recipe. The woman beside you knots her thread and stands. She moves to a barrel of grease and dips a cloth into it. Slowly, she begins rubbing it into the sail's surface, conditioning it, waterproofing it, sending it with that unmistakable cocktail of sheep fat and fish. It's not delightful, but it's effective. The wind picks up slightly, and the sail flutters overhead. You feel its power, not just in its size, but in its potential. This thing catches wind and turns it into momentum, into direction, into destiny. You look back toward the village and remember the looms, the dye pots, the pounding paddles. This sail is all of them. It's a mobile quilt of sweat and weather, stretched across the spine of exploration itself. A young boy scrambles up the deck with a handful of raw wool. "Padding," he says, tossing it toward the hull. "It'll be used to reinforce seams or muffle noise. Even the scrap stuff matters." And here's the twist. In some sagas, sails are described with a reverence usually reserved for swords or kings. One tale speaks of a sail bright as sunlight, a gift from a distant queen. Another boasts of a sail that sang in high wind. Exaggerations, maybe. But the sentiment is real. To Vikings, the sail wasn't a backdrop. It was an instrument of freedom. You watch as a man coils the rigging, careful not to disturb the freshly treated wool. The whole crew moves around the sail with quiet deference. No one steps on it. No one jokes. It's like a cathedral roof, blessed by the hands of women they'll never thank aloud. You sit on the deck, letting the sail's shadow stretch across your lap. It covers you like a blanket. Not warm, exactly, but protective. You feel a strange kinship with it. A machine of motion, born of softness. A contradiction, like all the best things. The boat creaks beneath you. A gull cries overhead. The wind shifts again, and the sail flutters once more, as if testing its own breath. And in that moment, you realize this sail is a story. Every fiber a sentence, every stitch a comma, and every gust of wind a new chapter waiting to be written. You leave the ship behind, boots crunching softly on the pebble path that snakes up from the fjord and leads into a dense forest trail. But you're not alone. A caravan winds beside you. Pack animals, traders, and quiet exchanges in whispered tongues. Bundles sway from shoulders, carts creak with weight. Some carry fish, others amber. But one bundle, slung across a short, wary man's back, is unmistakably cloth, folded, patterned, and bound with a cord of twisted wool. You've stumbled into the silent arteries of Viking trade. It's not a loud, bustling marketplace. It's quiet, steady. This is the slow commerce of survival. And at the heart of it, textiles. Mainstream historical fact: Viking textiles were a major trade item, especially in regions with limited sheep or weaving expertise. Finished cloth, dyed yarn, and even loom weights were shipped across Scandinavia and far beyond, reaching the British Isles, the Frankish Empire, and even Byzantium. You walk beside the cloth carrier for a while, catching glimpses of what he's hauling. One bundle is plain, clearly meant for sails or tunics, but another, bright with blues and a streak of green, could be trim for a noble's cloak or an altar hanging. He doesn't talk much, but his eyes scan every traveler you pass. He's not just delivering wool. He's weighing wealth, bartering options, potential buyers. The fringe tidbit for this leg of your journey: there's archaeological evidence that Viking cloth was sometimes folded and sealed with wax imprints, like official documents, not because people couldn't peek at cloth, but to prove it hadn't been unfurled or tampered with. A medieval tamper, evidence seal, if you will. You arrive at a trading outpost just before dusk. The buildings are squat and low, built from timber and turf, and they hug the bend of a river. Traders call out softly, making offers and counteroffers with the precision of chess players. You step into one low, roofed hut, and instantly spot it textiles, hanging from beams piled in crates, rolled and labeled. Some are simple bolts of rough cloth, others are dyed and trimmed with borders, still more mysterious, small pieces, no larger than your forearm, adorned with knots and woven symbols. A young girl sweeps between the bundles, eyes bright. She offers you a square to feel. It's soft, luxurious, possibly silk. No, it's wool. But fulled to near perfection, then dyed with what looks like woad and weld to form a sharp green, blue chevron. Historians still argue whether Viking traders personally transported fine textiles or traded primarily in raw yarn and undyed bolts. It probably depended on the destination and the appetite of the local market. You watch a man haggle over a cloak. It's not a battle of words, it's a ballet. He fingers the fabric, stretches it slightly, rubs it between two fingers like a sommelier with wine. He shakes his head. The woman seller shrugs. He raises an eyebrow. She doesn't blink. Finally, he nods and hands over a pouch of iron nails. Yes, nails. Because in this world, even hardware is currency. You step outside again, heart ticking a little faster. This is a textile stock exchange. Silent, shuffling, and utterly essential. The path of Viking cloth didn't stop at the dock or the hearth. It threaded across borders, through hands, and into households that had never seen fjord. A woman in Dublin might wear a woolen cap woven in Norway. A Byzantine merchant might admire a patterned trim from Denmark, not knowing the girl who spun its threads had never left her valley. And that's the magic, isn't it? You touch a strip of cloth, and suddenly you're not just touching a thing. You're touching the hours spent spinning. The winter nights by the fire. The lauder, the curses, the sore fingers. You're touching effort translated. The girl from earlier reappears beside you. She holds up a tiny band, tablet, woven, finely patterned, unbelievably precise. For you, she says. Trade? You fumble for something, anything. A button from your coat, a coin, a shoelace. She takes the coin, nods approvingly, and slips away. The band is now yours. You wrap it around your wrist. It fits perfectly, like it always meant to be there. As the sun dips below the treetops, the traders begin bedding down. Fires spark. Bread is passed. You sit near the warmth and watch as a woman unwraps a length of cloth from her pack and folds it carefully, like it's a child. She tucks it under her arm, not for storage, but his home. Portable, foldable, transferable, but still home. And when the stars finally poke through the clouds, you realize you've been walking a thread. Not metaphorically. Literally. A trail of wool, dyed and spun, that stitches together a world once soft. Silent layer at a time. You're somewhere between sleep and story now, but the path winds onward, leading you back into the longhouse. This time, your eyes aren't on the looms or the wool piles. They're drawn to the cloth itself, not the structure, but the subtleties, the colors, the edges, the patterns so faint they almost vanish unless you catch them in the right light. Because Viking weaving wasn't all utility and bulk. It spoke in whispers. You kneel beside a wall where lengths of cloth hang like quiet paintings. At first glance, they're simple in stripes, checks, the occasional diamond motif. But the longer you look, the more you see. Colors alternate not just for variety, but with intent. A series of red lines spaced evenly across one tunic could denote family lineage. Another cloth edged in dark bands might mean mourning, and a particularly bright band woven into a belt. That might be more personal, like a love token or a dare. Mainstream historical fact: Viking weavers often incorporated patterns directly into the warp and weft using techniques like twill and tablet weaving. These designs weren't just decorative, they could indicate regional origin, clan identity, and even social status. You run your fingers across a tablet, woven trim. It's no wider than 2 fingers, but its complexity is dizzying. Interlaced lines curve and knot into shapes that almost resemble runes. Or maybe animals. Or both. You try to trace them with your eyes, but the pattern keeps shifting. That's your fringe tidbit. Some researchers believe Viking patterns contain symbolic codes. Not magic exactly, but cultural shorthand. A border might recall a god's myth. A knot could mark a sacred number. The cloth speaks, if you know how to listen. You sit back and wonder, was this knowledge taught? Passed down mother to daughter, weaver to apprentice? Or did each pattern evolve organically, a private language stitched from memory? Historians still argue whether specific motifs held consistent meaning across the Norse world, or varied wildly by household and region. The archaeological record is tantalizing but fragmented. We have scraps, threads, glimpses, the rest lost to time or preserved only in myth. A weaver walks past, arms full of half-finished trim. You follow her to her station and watch as she threads her heddles for a new pattern. She counts under her breath, not out of doubt, but rhythm, the beat of the weave, the logic of the loom. She nods at you and gestures toward her work. You see the beginning 3 red threads, then 2 yellow, then black. You ask what it means. She shrugs. "It's for my sister," she says. "That's it. That's all. A private design, a personal gift. It doesn't need to mean anything to you. You remember a grave you passed once, a long time ago in this journey. A burial mound where a strip of patterned wool lay wrapped around the wrist of the deceased. Just a bracelet, but one that outlived its owner by a millennium. Its pattern faded but stubborn, like a final word spoken in a dialect no one else remembers. You touch your own wrist, where the young girl's trade band still rests. Suddenly, it feels like a message. You wander now to the edge of the longhouse, where bundles of stored cloth are tucked high under the eaves. Some are heavy, sail remnants perhaps. Others are delicate, meant for ceremony or celebration. And some are strange, layered in symbols, deliberately knotted, and hidden away like secrets. You dare not touch them. They don't feel casual. One strip in particular catches your eye. It's blue and white, with little loops on the edge. It looks almost like writing. But not in any runes you know. You whisper the shapes aloud anyway, hoping they might unlock something ancient. They don't. But the cloth rustles softly, like a sigh. The weaver behind you laughs gently. "Not all cloth wants to be read," she says. You nod embarrassed, but somehow relieved. You sit near the hearth again as evening folds around the room, like a blanket. A few children play with scraps, tying them into dolls and pretend swords. One girl weaves a pretend spell with a frayed ribbon. "I'm Frigg," she declares. "I make the sky." And maybe she does. You realize that every Viking child likely learned to weave, or at least to recognize patterns. Not as homework, but as heritage. Each warp thread a timeline. Each weft a heartbeat. Together, a story only your fingers can tell. The flames crackle softly. Someone begins humming. You lean back, eyes half-lidded, watching the cloth flutter above the doorway as wind finds its way in. It dances just slightly, the way a flag might wave at a returning ship. And there, in the flutter, you spot it, a small square woven into the corner of the curtain. A mark, a symbol, a fingerprint made of yarn. You smile. Not everything loud matters. Some power arrives quietly, stitched into corners, passed hand to hand, never written down. The silent legacy of the loom. The air outside has taken on that sharp clarity that only comes with late autumn. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and follow a winding path toward the edge of the settlement. There, near the fringe of a frozen stream, you spot something unexpected, a small workshop, all wood and turf, with its door propped open. Inside you find a man. Yes, a man. And he's weaving. He doesn't notice you at first. He's bent over a horizontal loom, narrower than the warp, weighted beasts you've grown used to. This one is for bands and ribbons, perhaps even belts. His hands move with elegance, looping threads, guiding the shuttle, adjusting tension. There's a rhythm here too, but it's quieter, more introspective. So, what's the deal? Was weaving really just woman's work? Mainstream historical fact: while textile work was primarily handled by women in Viking society, there is clear evidence that some men wove as well, especially in Iceland and among monastic communities across medieval Europe. In fact, a few sagas even describe male weavers, though usually with a note of curiosity or exception. You clear your throat softly. He glances up, gives a curt nod, then returns to his work. Not rude, just focused. The room is neat, tools arranged with almost monastic discipline. Skeins of wool hang from hooks like sleeping bats. A small fire burns low in the corner, keeping the chill at bay. You spot a carved spindle on the shelf. A man's hand has worn its edge smooth. Here's your fringe fact. In Norse Greenland, archaeological finds suggest that textile work may have shifted over time to include more male laborers, especially in isolated settlements where everyone needed to contribute regardless of gendered norms. Survival, after all, doesn't care about stereotypes. The man finishes a row, ties off his shuttle, and motions for you to sit. You do. He pulls out a band, narrow, patterned, and clearly meant for something ceremonial. Wedding, he says simply. Then adds mine. You blink. Not at the idea of a man weaving for his own wedding. That's romantic. But at the quiet pride in his voice. This isn't just skill. It's identity. Historians still argue whether male weavers were common or exceptional in Viking society. The written records are sparse and often colored by later Christian or chivalric assumptions. But what's clear is that where weaving occurred, it was respected, regardless of who held the shuttle. The man stands and moves to another loom. This one is vertical, and it holds a half-finished tapestry. You gasp. It's stunning. Bright colors, precise edges. The image is hard to decipher at first. Maybe a boat, a tree, a woman, maybe all three, woven into one symbolic whole. He shrugs. Takes time. You ask where he learned. My mother, he replies. And her brother. He worked in a monastery once. Then he adds, they didn't call it woman's work. Just work. You glance around again, suddenly aware that this quiet hut, modest and remote, is an archive. A place where the art of weaving is preserved and practiced, not by tradition's dictate, but by personal choice. The fire pops. He smiles faintly. I fish too, he says. Weave nets, stitch sails. Cloth isn't so different. That's when it clicks. This isn't a man challenging a norm. This is a man doing what needs doing. And liking it, you look again at the tapestry. It's beautiful. But more than that, it's unexpected. A man, alone in a weaving hut, spinning his wedding band with patience and care. It challenges everything you thought you knew about Viking gender roles. And it does so not with rebellion, but with rhythm. You step outside again, blinking in the sunlight. Children run past, one with a makeshift sword, another with a cloak clearly meant for a queen. None of them seem surprised that the man in the hut weaves. Maybe no one is. Maybe the loom, like the longship, answers only to skill. You carry that thought with you as you return to the village. In the longhouse, a woman is weaving. In the field, a man patches a woolen sail. On the porch, a child wraps yarn around a stick, imitating the grown-ups. You see now that the line between roles wasn't as fixed as modern minds might expect. It flexed with need, with context, with skill. You find your seat by the hearth again and stare into the fire. Smoke curls upward. Wool yarn dangles from the rafters, catching the glow like a lazy halo. Weaving, it turns out, wasn't about gender. It was about survival, about beauty, about legacy, and about expression, however it chose to present itself. Calloused hands, gentle stitches, and all. It's evening again, the hearth glowing low, casting long, slow shadows across the floor of the longhouse. You're settled on a bench, belly full of barley stew, when a sharp voice from the far end of the room breaks the lull. No, that's my space. My weights. I carved the damn rune on them. Heads turn. Eyebrows rise. And you realize you're about to witness something rare and strangely delightful, a legal dispute over a loom. The two women involved are fierce-eyed and firm-voiced. One stands beside a half-woven bolt of cloth, arms crossed. The other gestures toward a pile of loom weights, marked faintly with carved runes and spirals. Their argument isn't just about thread or territory. It's about ownership, productivity, and whose wool gets woven first. Welcome to Viking textile law. Mainstream historical fact, Norse legal texts, including the Icelandic grudges and regional laws from Norway and Denmark, contain numerous clauses related to textiles. They outline ownership rights over wool, disputes about loom placement, rules on compensation for ruined cloth, and even penalties for theft of spinning tools. You shift on your bench and listen as a third woman steps in, clearly the house's authority figure. She mediates calmly, citing an old ruling. First to warp has right of way. But if the weights are marked, then claim must be honored. Boom. Textile jurisprudence. It's all incredibly civil. Well, mostly. One of them mutters something under her breath that might be about goats. You decide not to ask. Here's your fringe tidbit. Loom weights were often personalized with marks, runes, or carved initials. Not just for style, but to signal ownership. And if someone else used your marked weight without permission, that could be theft. Or at least grounds for compensation in wool. After a few more barbed comments, and a shared drink to smooth things over, the dispute cools. One woman agrees to use a smaller loom. The other promises not to shift the weights without asking. Justice served, Viking style. You think that's the end of it, but no. The conversation drifts into other realms of textile law. Someone brings up the third fleece clause, a rule stating that if a household hosted another family for more than 2 seasons, the wool of the third shearing went to the host. Logical, but also delightfully specific. Another woman recounts a saga episode where a marriage arrangement was voided because the promised dowry included 7 cloaks of white weave, but only 5 arrived, and one had a wine stain. The room bursts into laughter. You're not sure if the story's true. Doesn't matter. The laughter is real. Historians still argue whether these textile laws were strictly enforced or more like cultural guidelines. Given the blend of oral tradition and formal legal codes in Viking society, it's likely both. Rules shaped by community, context, and a bit of sass. You rise and wander toward a smaller side room where tools are neatly arranged on a bench. Bone needles, spindles, a comb for carding wool. Each one a potential item in a property dispute. You imagine a modern small claims court handling a case over spindle rights. Judge Judy would weep. Nearby, a list is scratched onto a plank of birch bark. It's not a shopping list. It's a record of cloth delivered to another household. 5 bolts. 2 died. 1 promised for spring festival. A literal textile ledger. You marvel at the bureaucracy. You came here expecting raw, rough life. And yes, that's part of it. But the order, the structure, it's unexpected and kind of wonderful. You head outside for air and spot a man loading finished cloth onto a sled. A younger boy follows, counting under his breath. 3 bolts, 1 cloak, a bag of skeins. This isn't just inventory, it's accountability. You call back to the earlier dispute in your mind. The marked weights, the loom placement. It all reveals something bigger than cloth. The legal scaffolding behind daily life. The loom isn't just a domestic tool, it's a legal entity, a symbol of negotiation and fairness. The moon hangs low, bathing the ground in silver. You sit again, this time on the edge of the porch, watching as the lights inside flicker like a heartbeat. It's strange, isn't it? To find rules and laws in something as soft as wool. But that's the brilliance of it. The Vikings didn't separate survival from justice. Even the smallest thread had weight. Even the hum of the loom had legal standing. You tug your own sleeve gently. It's warm, durable, and maybe, in some long-forgotten law code, completely legal. The fire is low again, its glow reflecting off the iron pot and casting sleepy shapes along the longhouse beams. But tonight, as the flames flicker, so does memory. Woven not into words, but into legend. You're surrounded now by stories. Not just those told aloud, but those embedded in cloth, carried in scarce, and framed under museum glass 1,000 years after their threads were first spun. Because the Viking loom didn't just produce sails and tunics, it spun myths. And you're starting to realize textiles weren't the backdrop to Viking life. They were central characters. Mainstream historical fact, textiles played symbolic roles in Viking graves, mythology, and legal rituals. Shrouds, banners, and ritual cloths have been recovered from burial mounds, and Norse sagas often describe fate through the metaphor of weaving. Threads of life, cloths of death, banners of destiny. You think back to the Valkyries from earlier. Their eerie battlefield weaving, their sword, shuttles, and arrow looms. Now, their work echoes even louder. Because even in Viking death, weaving had a voice. You remember the famous Oseberg ship burial, unearthed in Norway. 2 noblewomen laid to rest with tapestries, loom weights, tools, and, according to some interpretations, a symbolic loom. One scholar described it as a funeral furnished not just for the body, but for the soul's journey across the threads of time. Fringe tidbit: one burial from Birka, Sweden, included a delicate strip of cloth embroidered with what some believe to be Kufic script, an Islamic calligraphy style. Some historians claim it spells Allah, while others insist it's geometric decoration. Either way, the thread carried messages across not only generations, but cultures. Vikings wove stories of trade, belief, and identity into the very fiber of their world. You walk the room now, and suddenly every fabric feels different. That simple band over the doorway. Maybe it was a wedding gift. The patch on a child's cloak. Maybe it came from a mother's dress, long gone. The border trim on the chieftain's tunic. Woven with 2 colors only harvested in midsummer. Every cloth is a time capsule, and the sagas knew it. In Njal Saga, a woman dreams of cloth torn and burned, foretelling doom. In another, a shirt woven by a spurned lover causes an enemy's skin to break out in boils. Textile magic, or textile revenge. Historians still argue how literal these stories were meant to be. Did Viking audiences believe that cursed cloaks and prophetic loom dreams were real, or were they metaphors, artful ways to express deeper truths? The sagas blend realism and fantasy so fluidly that the answer might be yes. To both. You sit again near the hearth, the gentle hush of spinning wheels murmuring nearby. An old woman recites something, eyes closed, her spindle keeping time like a heartbeat. Her words are slow, deliberate, poetic. Something about Freyja, flax, and the stars above the loom beam. You don't understand all the words, but the rhythm is familiar. It's the rhythm of weaving. Of wrapping something fragile in something enduring. And then, you're in a museum, just for a moment. The air is dry. The light is sterile. Behind glass, a fragment of wool rests, faded, frayed, but still here. There's a small sign with dates and theories. But the cloth doesn't need it. Its presence says everything. You blink, and you're back in the longhouse. The fire is lower still. Someone is humming. The weavers are slowing down. The cloths they've made aren't just tools. They're testimonies. To love, to grief, to work, to winters survived, to laughter shared. You remember the argument over loom weights, the dye pot that hissed, the boy counting sailcloth bolts. All of it. Threads in the same story. You lean against a post and run your hand over a woven wall hanging. Its pattern is simple, repeating. But there's a snag, a knot in the middle. It wasn't fixed. Maybe it couldn't be. Maybe they left it on purpose. You remember an old weaver saying, "The gods hide in the knots." And maybe that's true. You close your eyes. You've seen women who wove storms, men who stitched marriages, children who tied games and gifts with equal care. You've seen cloth wrapped around the dying and held tight by the living. You've seen how something as soft as wool can carry stories sharper than swords. You exhale. There is power in the quiet. Power in the patterned. Power in the fabric of the forgotten. And as the flames sigh low, you realize the Viking loom didn't just weave cloth. It wove legend. The longhouse is dark now, truly dark. Just the faint orange blink of dying coals remains, painting everything in long, sleepy shadows. You can hear someone turning in their bed place. A cough, a yawn, the rustle of a blanket hand, woven, dyed with matter, and probably mended a dozen times. You stay seated, not ready to leave just yet, because tonight, the loom has fallen silent. You rise slowly, walking barefoot across the packed earth floor. Each step seems to echo, not loudly, but with weight, and that weight isn't from the ground. It's from everything you've carried through this journey, from fleece to spindle, from warp, weighted giants to battle looms, from the fiery stink of dye pots to the hush of the trade routes. You've walked thread paths and mapped in silence, tied in time, and here in the stillness you feel the last thread fall. You pass by the looms one last time. Empty. Their threads loosened, draping like abandoned harp strings. One has a finished piece still hanging, just a few inches of cloth. Someone will cut it free tomorrow. Fold it, maybe gift it, maybe bury it. You touch it gently. It's warm from the house's breath. Mainstream historical fact. The end of a weaving, when the final weft is placed and the cloth cut from the loom, was often accompanied by small rituals. Sometimes a prayer, sometimes a spit in the fire, sometimes just a long, deep breath, because the loom had held more than wool. It had held attention, intention. Fringe tidbit. There's a folk belief, still surviving in parts of Scandinavia, that the final thread of any project should never be cut in silence. You speak a word, any word, to mark the passage, to keep the cloth from forgetting who made it. You whisper something, and the cloth whispers back. Outside, frost has laced itself into every corner. The steps, the sheepfold, even the woodpile. The sky is a woven blanket of stars, spread so wide it makes your chest ache. You imagine them stitched in by a cosmic weaver, who didn't miss a single gap, who kept her tension perfect, night after night. You turn once more toward the longhouse and watch as the smoke rises soft and pale, vanishing into the dark. The people inside are sleeping now. Dreaming, maybe. And you wonder, do they dream in thread? Do they walk the spindles? Do they feel the push of the shuttle, the weight of warped stones, the hum of old wool drying in a loft? Do they meet the Valkyries again? Hear the looms clatter over the moors. Do they smell dye and think of summer? You imagine them waking tomorrow, lighting the hearth, picking up the comb, the spindle, the skein. Another thread, another row, another day, because weaving doesn't end. It pauses, it breathes. And you, well, you've walked the length of it now, thread by thread, pattern by pattern, silence by silence. You reach the forest's edge again and pause. The wind lifts your hair. The sky brightens, faintly with the promise of dawn. And somewhere in the distance, a loom creaks to life.